Holland, 32 years old, had only recently been promoted to vice admiral due to his nimble tactical leadership during the attack on Iserlohn Fortress at the end of the previous year. Though that attack ended in a grand failure for the sixth time, so much so that the Imperial forces mockingly said, "The Iserlohn corridors paved with the corpses of rebels." The Alliance forces had managed some victories in individual battles. One such example was when Holland defeated an enemy fleet that had launched from the fortress, thanks to his bold tactics. Though he had achievements to his name, Bucock saw that Holland's confidence was 10 times greater than his actual success. "I would prefer not to have unnecessary interference with the maneuvers of my fleet," Holland declared to the old admiral before the battle started. "If we forcibly coordinate with the other fleets, it will only stifle our fleet's strengths and benefit the enemy. It would also limit our strategic choices." To the old admiral, it seemed that Holland was confusing strategy with tactics. "We never had many strategic options to begin with. The enemy is attacking us, and we're defending. At best, we can choose the most favorable battlefield for the decisive battle, like in the Battle of Dagon. You're satisfied with just defending. You don't think so?" "Of course not. No matter how many times we repel the invading enemy, as long as the source of their despotism remains, the threat will never end. To bring this fight to a permanent close, we must undertake a long-distance strike to Odin, the heart of evil, and bring down the Empire." Bucock shook his head. "But we don't even have the strength to capture Iserlohn Fortress, let alone the idea of launching a 1,000-year light-year expedition to invade the Empire's core." "That may have been true up until now." This response spoke volumes, revealing that Holland fancied himself as the supreme commander of an invasion force into the Empire's homeland. "I respect your experience and achievements, Admiral Bucock. Your past experience and achievements." His voice carried a hint of mockery, which stirred anger in Bucock's deputy, Commander Pfeifel. However, unable to lash out at a vice admiral, Pfeifel simply clenched his hands behind his back tightly. After the communications screen went blank, Commander Pfeifel growled, "Admiral, if I may speak bluntly, if Admiral Holland is so confident in his tactics, perhaps we should simply be spectators. A strategy doesn't fail faster than when it's executed." The old admiral stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Based on my past experience." Later that day at 1600, the two fleets closed to a distance of 10.8 light seconds. It was the distance at which, by tacit understanding, a mock war would begin. Who was the first to shout, "Fire"? Thousands of beams of light tore through space. Thus began the battle later known as the Third Battle of Tiamat. A swirl of scorching colors erupted against the black backdrop of a graphite disk, bursting and scattering with each impact, causing shock waves of residual energy to shake the warships. Seated elegantly on the command chair of the battleship Tannhauser, Reinhard observed the chaotic dance of light and heat unfolding before him on the screen. It seemed to him that a battle devoid of any originality was emerging from a formation equally lacking in creativity. Shifting his gaze slightly, he noticed the worried look on his red-haired friend's face. Don't worry, Kirscheiss. It can be interesting to watch others' battles from behind. Reinhard smiled. Human beings can be happy or miserable depending on their outlook. Although Reinhard had always despised such cheap, moralistic platitudes, this time, being held back seemed more desirable than being thrust into the front lines. There was no doubt that Fleet Marshal Muckenberger and his peers intended to prevent Reinhard from earning any glory, but conversely, it also meant his forces would be preserved. Regardless of the Marshal's intentions, Reinhard's fleet could serve as a crucial final force in the decisive battle. For that to happen, however, the Alliance forces would need to put up a decent fight and wear down the Imperial fleet. If they managed to do that, even if the battle held no strategic significance, it could be of great political advantage for Reinhard. Achieving a significant victory would lead to promotion to admiral, and the closer he got from vice admiral to admiral, the nearer he would be to his ultimate goal. The flare of light reflected in Reinhard's ice-blue eyes grew fiercer. No matter how foolish a battle was, once it began, Reinhard's blood temperature would rise, and the cells beneath his fair skin would start to dance rhythmically. Among the main elements that composed his soul was the burning spirit of a warrior, sometimes obscuring the distant horizon of his ambitions like a gathering storm cloud. Despite the contradiction with his rational mind, Reinhard yearned to be in the thick of battle. At the same time, he felt irritation. He could hardly believe that those who had pushed him to the rear, hoping to monopolize the glory, were fully capitalizing on their opportunity. The Alliance fleet, more specifically Holland's 11th Fleet, appeared to ignore their allies and boldly charge forward, seemingly intent on launching a direct assault. "Concentrate fire!" Fleet Marshal Muckenberger ordered in a weighty tone. The command was immediately executed, and converging beams of light boiled a corner of the universe. However, the Alliance fleet's movements exceeded the Imperial forces' expectations, both in speed and direction. The Imperial fleet's barrage pierced through the thin Alliance ranks, but failed to inflict any significant damage, dissipating ineffectively into the void. Meanwhile, the Alliance's seemingly disorganized counterattack began punching holes in the densely packed Imperial fleet. The Alliance forces maneuvered through the searing energy strikes, pouncing on the Imperial fleet's throat and unleashing the full firepower of their short-range weaponry, tearing into the enemy's main arteries. The moment the beams pierced the enemy ship's outer walls, they transformed into light dragons, slithering in all directions, flailing their tongues. The Imperial fleet's communications were engulfed in interference and confusion, broadcasting calls for evasive action and dispersal. However, this only bred more chaos and panic. The Imperial forces appeared to be at the mercy of the enemy. Reinhard let out a brief laugh, like the sound of ice cubes clinking in a crystal glass. I don't know who the enemy commander is, but they seem to think that disregarding logic makes for a clever tactic, and our own forces getting shaken up by such antics. Pathetic. The red-haired youth nodded in agreement. Indeed, sir, but their fleet movements are quite impressive, almost artistic. Art is unproductive. Look at the disorder of their lines. It's as if they're moving around just to waste energy. Though there was originality in the enemy's tactics, it wasn't the kind Reinhard desired. He aimed to establish new theories, not rely on flashy tricks to deceive the enemy. An impressive display of tactics, even for the enemy, a third voice interjected. Reinhard didn't turn around, already knowing who it was. The voice belonged to his chief of staff, Rear Admiral Norden. Rear Admiral Norden was a constant reminder to Reinhard that the military was just another bloated bureaucratic institution. He held his position as Reinhard's chief of staff due to a directive from the Ministry of Military Affairs. Now, not out of loyalty to his young, beautiful superior. His dedication never exceeded the strict boundaries of duty. The eldest son of a viscount, Norden was destined to inherit the family title once his father, a deputy minister of the interior, reached the age of 70. Though in his early 30s and proud of his quick rise through the ranks, Norden paled in comparison to Reinhard, and as a result, held little fondness for his youthful superior. The ministry had placed Norden under Reinhard's command not out of malice towards either party, but simply due to a lack of consideration. Ignoring Reinhard's displeased silence, Norden continued speaking. The enemy commander's tactics exceed conventional theories. Without adhering to any fixed formation, they move freely like an amoeba, delivering unexpected and painful blows. I must admit, it's quite extraordinary. His opinion clearly differed from that of his superior. There's always someone worse. What a bunch of incompetence. Reinhard unleashed a barrage of insults toward his allies, his ice-blue eyes shimmering with the aurora of anger. Though half of his fury was directed at his chief of staff, the latter seemed entirely unaware of it. So what if we were struck in an unexpected place? It wasn't a direct hit to our core. The Alliance forces were agile. The Alliance forces were agilely. The Alliance forces were agilely maneuvering. Agilely. The Alliance forces were agilely maneuvering, causing bleeding wounds on the Imperial fleet. But there was no way they could wipe out the entire Imperial force. Such tactics were only effective as a diversion when a large friendly force was present behind the enemy. They may be incompetent, but they're fighting bravely as Imperial soldiers, fulfilling their duties, the Chief of Staff said. Meanwhile, our fleet is just sitting here, watching our allies struggle. What are your thoughts on this, Your Excellency? A flash of lightning flickered in Reinhardt's blue eyes. Suppressing his momentary rage, he explained to his uninspired chief of staff, "Looking at the enemy's movements, they excel in speed and dynamism, but it's clear they lack coordination with other units, and they're ignoring the extension of their supply lines. In short, their strategy is an extremely short-term one. By disregarding the basics of military operations, they aim to confuse our forces and exploit that to increase our losses. If that's the case, we should avoid unnecessary engagements, retreat the same distance they advance, and counterattack once they've exhausted their physical and mental energy. Therefore, there's no need to respond at this time." "Then when will we respond?" "When the enemy reaches the climax of their offensive." "And when would that be? In a year? 100 years?" Reinhardt could have easily lashed out. Instead, he merely shrugged his shoulders and dismissed the chief of staff with a wave of his hand. His luxurious golden hair rippling, Reinhardt sighed. He glanced at his red-haired friend, speaking in a boyish tone. "Kircheis, praise me. Truly, these past 2 weeks, I've shown remarkable patience. I feel like I'm exhausting a lifetime's worth of endurance right here." "Just a little more patience, Your Excellency," Kircheis gently reassured his golden-haired friend, fully understanding his struggles. "Once you turn the tide with your own hands, it will be clear to even the most foolish who was right. Then you can take pride in your victory." Reinhardt sighed again, but the brightness returned to his gaze as he looked at Kircheis. A mischievous smile suddenly crossed his face. "I'll do just that. But, Kircheis, when I do gloat in my victory, you'll say, 'They already know their mistakes and are ashamed. Please forgive them,' won't you?" Reinhardt reached out with his elegant white fingers and playfully intertwined them with his friend's red hair. "You're too kind. But let me tell you this. You only need to be kind to my sister and me. There's no need to extend that attitude to anyone else." It was hard to tell if his words were a joke or sincere, as his eyes glimmered with a mixture of both emotions. "The Imperial forces are retreating without engaging. Our victory is within sight," came the optimistic report. However, upon hearing this, the elderly Admiral Bucock furrowed his white brows. Whether the enemy's retreat was genuine or merely a trap, it was difficult to decide. Everything lay in the realm of relativity. Even if Holland's actions seemed reckless, as long as the enemy was weaker, victory would belong to the Alliance. While the old admiral was deep in thought, another communication arrived. "Admiral Bucock, I would appreciate your assistance in restraining Holland's recklessness. He may understand the limitations of old tactics, but that doesn't mean he's incapable of constructing any new ones." "But, Admiral Alonhu, for now he seems to be winning. He might even achieve a cold victory." It would be nice if that, for now, could last, but the limits are drawing near. If the Imperial forces have even one commander capable of seeing further ahead, they are likely pulling back from the confusion and waiting for the right moment to strike. If we don't stop him and order a retreat, we could all be dragged down with him." Ulanhu had only a single name, without a family name. He was a descendant of a once fierce, nomadic horseman tribe that had controlled half of human space. Though not particularly tall, barely enough to be considered of above average height. His broad shoulders and thick chest gave him an imposing, almost giant-like presence. His dark complexion and sharp, gleaming black eyes marked him as a man in his early 40s, renowned as a formidable commander. Holland thinks of himself as the reincarnation of Admiral Bruce Ashby, Ilanhu said, referring to their predecessor who had died in battle half a century ago. Bukak nodded in acknowledgement. He was aware of that. Holland had become a vice admiral at the same age, 32, as Ashby, inspired by one of the most prestigious examples in history. It was only natural that Holland's ambition would glow ever brighter. If he becomes a marshal by the time he's 35, he would surpass Ashby, Bukak mused. But as you mentioned, the Imperial forces also seem to have someone who can see far ahead. They say some of their fleets are retreating without engaging. Not fleeting or rout, just retreating. Exactly. You've noticed it as well? Of course I have. The only one who hasn't is Holland, with his foolhardy optimism. He seems unable to distinguish between advance and victory, or retreat and defeat. Ulanhu clicked his tongue loudly. Such erratic fleet movements can't be sustained for long. The only thing they do is accelerate the moment they reach their breaking point. If the Imperial commander has sufficient forces, they'll likely lure Holland into their depths and crush him from all sides. He doesn't seem to realize it. Bukak stroked his chin, contemplating Ulanhu's words as he gazed into the communication screen. I'd say, Admiral Ulanhu, that to retreat when you're winning, or at least believe you are, is harder than backing down after being dumped by a woman. The elderly admiral's metaphor elicited a bitter smile of agreement from his colleague. At this point, all they could do was ensure that the collapse of the 11th Fleet didn't lead to the disintegration of the entire army. The enemy is approaching. Hearing this report, Reinhardt instinctively cast a glance at his chief of staff's profile. Did this man think his superior was blind? Or did he believe that enemies were meant to retreat by definition? Aren't you going to respond, Commander? The tone... Aren't you going to respond, Commander? The tone irritated Reinhardt, but before he could react, Kircheis intervened. Should we advance our lines slightly and engage, Your Excellency? With that, the anger Reinhardt had been about to direct at his chief of staff dissipated. No, it's still too early. Continue to fall back.